In this lesson, we're going to prepare our bridge for our dynamic scene. Okay, so let's go ahead and get right into breaking up the different pieces of our bridge. So I'm going to start with the main pieces on the bridge. And let's go ahead and go to Max Script, Run Script, and then let's choose Fracture Voronoi version 1.1. Now remember, you can download these from scriptspot.com and you can actually search for these specific Max scripts. Okay. Now go ahead and navigate to these files and then open those. Now when we choose Fracture, it's going to go ahead and bring up our dialog box here. And the way this works is we have to actually pick an object that we want to fracture. So let's hit Pick Object, select the object we want to fracture, and then we have all of these different options available to us. So the first thing that we have is number of parts, and I need to decide how many parts I want to break this into. And I know that I want to go ahead and break this into about 150. That's a good number there. And it's always good to use this tool in moderation. Now what we could do is break this apart into, like, let's say 10 pieces, and then we could choose some of the bigger chunks and break those apart and all of that. But I find that that starts to create a unstable dynamic scene. We have some pieces that begin to just explode on impact and they go out really far, and that's just not something that I'm looking for. So by testing this, I found out that if we break it into smaller pieces first, and then we choose a couple of the areas that we want some really small pieces to be broken into, we could do that later on. Now one thing that I do want to point out before we begin fracturing is it might be a good idea to go ahead and actually clone some of these different pieces, because once you fracture it, you can't undo it. Okay? So if you're worried about fracturing it and you're not really certain with your dynamic scene, always save a copy before you begin fracturing. And then you could also clone pieces. Now I know that I've saved this copy, so I'm just going to go ahead and begin fracturing this. So I have number of parts at 150. I'm going to leave my iterations at 1. And we can create a new material ID and set that ID to 2. And I'm going to keep my actual material, this gray material that is on here. It's going to create a brand new map channel and then also keep my map size. I can go ahead and actually break this into 150 pieces right now if I wanted to do so, but I need to kind of check on these options down below first. I want to actually do a uniform color on all of my fractures, and I want to be able to choose the color myself. So I'm going to actually go to Uniform and then choose a red color. Okay. Now we have another set of options here. We have bounding box centers, or we have volume cell centers. And the bounding box centers is basically the bounding boxes around all of these chunks. The pivot point is going to center around that. But what I want is the volume centers. Okay. Now once we have these set up, let's go ahead and hit break into 150. And you'll notice that this begins to say that it's breaking, and it's going to take just a little bit to do so. Now it might also look like 3ds Max is going to freeze up, and it might even say not responding at one point. And that's really something that you shouldn't worry about. Just wait on this Max script to finish out. Now the higher your parts are, the longer this is going to take. Okay. Now normally what I like to do is just give it a couple of seconds after I've broken something, just for 3ds Max to catch up and get back into its memory. Okay. Alright, so we've broken this up into several chunks here. And what I want to do is go ahead and select a couple of these pieces up front, just to kind of get an idea of what I want to fracture even more into smaller pieces. So I might do like these 3 chunks right here, break those up. Okay. So with that one selected, I'm going to go ahead and go to Bridge Main, pick that, and then choose that small piece there. Okay. And you'll see that it says Bridge Main 01 part, and I'm not really sure. It says 147. Okay. So the number of parts I want to break this up into, I'm going to take this really low to about 10. I'm going to keep a new material ID and keep my material. Let's change its color. And I'm going to go down to, let's say, kind of a pink color here. And let me actually type in 100, whoops, and 100 on this, because I'm going to actually break up some other chunks here, and I want those to be the same color. Okay, so let's hit OK, and let's break into 10. Let's choose our next section that we want to break apart. Let's pick that. Go to Uniform Color, and let's type in 100 and 100. There we go. And let's break this into 10. Choose this last one right here, and you could do any one you want. Just make sure that you keep the number of fractures kind of to a minimum. Okay, let's pick that object, number of parts 10. Let's change its color, type in 100 on our green and then 100 on our blue. Okay, let's break this into 10, and there we go. Now, at this point, what I would do is go ahead and actually test the dynamics of this fracture. So let's go to Edit, Select By, Color. Let's choose this red color here. And then we're going to do Edit, Select By, Color, hold down Control, and select our next one. So that way we have all of these pieces selected in this bridge. And let's set them to Dynamic. Okay, so just click on that, and you'll see that it breaks all these up into dynamic geometry, or dynamic rigid bodies, and you'll see that we have these blue lines, and these are called the hulls of our physical mesh. Now what we need to do is go ahead and go to our Mass Effects tools, and we're going to use the Edit tab of our Mass Effects tools, because we have multiple objects selected. And even though they all have the Mass Effects rigid body applied to them, you'll see that we can't actually select any parameters in the Modify panel. Okay, compared to if we had one single object selected, we would be able to see those parameters. So if you're doing multi-edits, go ahead and open up the Mass Effect tools. Alright, so we have that set to Dynamic. Let's check Start in Sleep mode, and what that's going to do is actually start everything to where it's actually sleeping, and nothing is going to happen until another rigid body collides with it. Let's go to Physical Material, and let's give it a preset of concrete. Okay. We have our physical material properties. That's not going to change because we're actually using a preset. And then we have our physical mesh, and right now this is set to convex, and that's what's giving us these blue hulls. So let's go ahead and switch this over to original. Because these objects are so complex, we want their original shape to be their physical mesh. Okay. Let's go ahead and close this, and let's create just a sphere out here in space. And I'll just create one. Doesn't really matter the size on it. And what I'm going to do is actually animate this colliding with our bridge. So let's grab our Move tool. Let's go to about frame 20. Auto key. And I'm just going to move this into position until it actually collides with our bridge. Move it kind of toward the center here. And then I'm going to turn off auto key and give this a kinematic rigid body type. So hold down on that and go to kinematic rigid body. Okay. Now with that selected, if you accidentally selected dynamic, you can always go to the rigid body type drop down and change it to kinematic. Okay. Let's go ahead and give it a physical preset of concrete, and then give it its mesh type as a sphere. Because this is a sphere object, it just makes it easier to make its mesh type as a sphere. Alright, so let's go ahead and take our time slider back to 0. Let's close our fracture dialog box for right now. And let's go ahead and simulate this. So let's start simulation. And you'll see that our object collides, and all of our pieces seem to fall very nicely. Okay, so nothing out of the ordinary, nothing's exploded and flying way off the screen or anything like that. Let's go ahead and stop our simulation. Let's reset that simulation, and that'll pop everything right back to 0. Okay. Now, if you want to have a little bit of fun with this, you can actually switch this kinematic to dynamic at a certain frame. So check until frame and then type in, let's do 10. Now let's start that simulation, and you'll see that our sphere collides, and then it's a dynamic object and it goes wherever it needs to go. Okay, so our bridge is now crumbling, and we don't have any weird results or anything like that. We've got a few pieces that are kind of bouncing a little sporadically, but that shouldn't be a problem once we actually finish this out. So let's stop our simulation and reset that, and now we're ready to go ahead and move on to our next part of the bridge, and we'll do that in our next lesson.